please record. I can't be here. But the TCI sponsors lots of things. LIFT is one of them. It's a faculty fellowship program, and it focuses on the faculty member, where we provide professional development and an opportunity to interact with and be supported by like-minded colleagues as we center our students in our teaching practice. And we're going to be opening the applications for 2 cohorts this year, one which will be Pullman based and one which will it'll be system based, but the training will happen on Vancouver campus. So please be looking for announcements about that. We'd love to have you join. We also host this pit stops. We host Elevate. We host a lot of things, but the pit stops are really just an opportunity to bring faculty together to talk. Since the pandemic, we haven't had an opportunity maybe to recenter our practice or to really connect with others. And I've always been really excited about this opportunity to convene with folks and hear about what's working in your classrooms, what's not, and learn more about our students as time continues to shift around us. So today I'm really pleased to welcome Vice Chancellor Lisa Guerrero. She's our Vice Chancellor on the Pullman campus for Equity and Inclusive Excellence. She joined our faculty well before me. She's obviously smarter and more talented and made a good choice. We're happy to have her. She came in 2004, and she's a professor of comparative ethnic studies in WSU's School of Languages, Cultures, and Race. The thing that is really special about Lisa, well, there's a lot of things that are special about Lisa, but I think the part that's particularly important for today is that she's passionate about intersectionalities and the relationships between culture and power that really affect our educational system. And so her work is centered and informed by that perspective, and is something that many of us don't have. So her scholarly and personal interests are going to intersect today to help us think more deeply about the classroom. I'm going to stop talking because you're really here to see her. But Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really excited to have you here with this group.
Well, thank you, Erica. It's quite the intro to live up to. So hopefully I will. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I would like to say from the outset, I want to leave enough time at the end for some questions. So during my presentation, I do have some reflective questions and a couple of reflective exercises. We're not going to actually do them here today, but I will make them available to Erica, and she will make them available to everyone so that you can take advantage of those at a later point. And because I am not really great at multitasking when I'm presenting, if you could hold questions until the end, that would be really great. So let me get started. So as you know, the title of today's pit stop is Educational Equity is a Journey and Not a Destination. And I think most folks on this call realize that, but I think sometimes we would really like some sort of checklist that we can refer to that we're doing it right. And sadly, I'm here to tell you that it is not something you're ever going to master, not something that you will ever just be able to reference and say, I'm doing it right. Educational equity, as with so much equity work, both inside and outside the institution, is a practice. And the only way to have impact is to keep practicing. And as you'll probably see through my presentation today, it's a it's a big lift, and you have to be committed to the practice, because there really won't be a point where you complete educational equity. You won't arrive to some educational equity nirvana. Equity practices necessarily require consistent and constant adjustment and development, mainly because the sociocultural and sociopolitical context, both globally and locally, in which we're educating students is constantly changing. And so equity really does sort of shift, the equity work really does sort of shift almost on a day-to-day basis. One of the important things to think about as we are engaging in our equity practice is that it's absolutely necessary to ground our practice in outcomes rather than intentions. As I always say in almost every single one of the presentations I give, intentions only serve you. So really focus on outcomes. And so the outcomes and how close you are to reaching them or how far away you are from reaching them is really going to help you determine what your equity practice is going to look like. And as we're focused on outcomes, it's going to follow that we're focused on accountability, right? And so when it comes to holding ourselves accountable, we really should ask, oftentimes holding ourselves accountable, we ask the wrong questions. So we really should be asking ourselves about our accountability. Am I fulfilling my responsibilities to eliminate harm and make my classroom environment diverse, equitable, and inclusive? Because oftentimes, right, we're asking ourselves, you know, was I biased when I did that? Was that racist? Was that really, when we're talking about working on equity practice, am I fulfilling my responsibilities? Okay. And some days you're doing a great job in doing it, and some days you're not, and that's fine. That's what practice is about, right? But to continually be asking yourself, am I fulfilling my responsibilities to eliminate harm, and to create an environment that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive? One place to begin with developing our accountability is to begin practicing cultural humility. So some of you may be familiar with this concept. If not, let me introduce it to you. So cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture and experiences, but one starts with an examination of their own beliefs and cultural and social identities. And cultural humility is a really important concept in our practice of educational equity and of accountability within that, because oftentimes when we think of someone as different, that will automatically position us as quote unquote normal. And so we're always then looking through this lens of someone else as different. And it's important to remind ourselves that difference lies between us and not within us. And we often don't do that because we often don't take the time to self-reflect and self-critique and examine our own social identities and positions and how we came to be in those identities and positions and what that means. So cultural humility really challenges us not to focus on our knowledge and expertise, but actually on the limits of that knowledge, so that we can ask questions and listen more to learn from each unique individual that we interact with. So as we start to think about how we bring equity practice to our classrooms, let's begin with some reflective questions. And again, I'm going to go through them right now, but we're not going to answer them as a group, but they will be made available to you after. So the first, what is your personal goal as a teacher? I think oftentimes because we have so many responsibilities in our role in the university that we often sort of go on autopilot and we kind of forget what is our goal as a teacher, our personal goal as a teacher. What do you think your primary role is as a teacher in relation to instruction? Okay, so there's a personal goal that you have as a teacher, but what do you think your primary role is as a teacher in relation to instruction? And then if you take a few minutes and write down some thoughts on the following questions, first thinking about one of the classes that you have taught. In your mind, what were the students supposed to learn by the end of the class? Now, certainly in our syllabi, we include learning outcomes. By the end of this class, you should X, Y, and Z, right? And those, you can start there, right? That they should have learned that by the end of the class. But are there other things, right? Because sometimes there is what is a hidden curriculum, right? And hidden curriculum really disproportionately affects negatively those minoritized communities who sit in our classrooms. So first generation students, students of color, LGBTQ students, students with different abilities, neurodiverse students. So in your mind, what were the students supposed to learn by the end of the class? How did the assignments help them to learn what they were, quote unquote, supposed to? Do you think most students would agree that they learned what you thought they should? And finally, if they learned something different about the topic than what you thought they would or should, does that mean they failed? Right? So these reflective questions get us to push ourselves to think about the classroom, about our role in it differently, right? Push us to think about the classroom as a community. And we often bandy about that term of a classroom community, but oftentimes we don't put it into action. And that final question is something especially that really pushes us to think about, okay, what does it mean to be in a classroom community? It means that there are people who are doing and taking different things from the classroom. And if they are taking something different than what you as the teacher thought they were supposed to, is that a failure? Or is that an opportunity to sort of rethink the possibilities of learning in your classroom? When we think about equity in our courses, we often, mainly because it's sort of easier, as I said at the beginning, right? Equity work, educational equity work especially, is a heavy lift. So we often think that if we treat all students the same, that that's fair and equal. And in practice, that is equal. But we're working towards equity, okay? And as I'm sure many of you have been in numerous workshops where the difference between equality and equity have been parsed out, but equality is much easier to hit. I mean, I say that with, a grain of salt living in the United States, but it's much easier to hit than equity, right? Because equity takes critical thought, it takes critical participation, it takes accountability, right? It takes self-reflection and self-criticality. And most folks aren't really willing to do that. So educational equity actually requires that educators recognize, respect, and attend to the diverse strengths and challenges of the students in their classrooms. And just a couple of days ago, we had the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Summit, where the topic was becoming a student-ready campus. And the idea of educational equity is folded up into that push to become a student-ready campus. What we know and what we can already see about the demographics of our student populations is that they will be infinitely different than the students that came before. They will be majority first generation students of color, Pell Grant eligible students. And that means that it is really incumbent upon us as teachers to begin to think differently about what we are doing as teachers, as educators, and towards equity, right? So it really does require that we recognize, respect, and attend to strengths and challenges, which are going to be varied of students in the classroom. We cannot assume that all the students are going to be in the same position when they enter our classroom. So as you're doing this, right, as you are becoming better at recognizing, respecting, and attending to the different strengths and challenges, do this by responding, excuse me, do this by responding with empathy. and really try to avoid a savior mentality, because that's another sort of pitfall of doing educational equity work, is that folks feel like, oh, I'm coming to your aid. And really, again, it's a classroom community. We sort of rise and fall together as a classroom community. So if one community member is not succeeding in a way because we are not attending to their diverse strengths and challenges, then it really falls on the community. It isn't really a savior. I'm going to save you. I'm going to help you. So just respond with empathy as best you can. And some days, like I said, it's harder to respond with empathy than others, but that's why it's a practice, right? Because you get a chance to do it again the next day. And push yourself to stay open to learning, right? Again, we cannot assume the uniformity of students entering our classrooms in their preparedness, in their experiences, in their backgrounds, in their interests, insofar as what they want to do with the knowledge that we share with them in our classrooms. So you have to stay open to learning. And in this way, keep in mind that you are the subject expert, but you are not the only teacher in the classroom. And we often lose sight of that, right? We should always be learning. Our students can teach us things that we've never known before if we're willing to be attentive to that. And we should, right? We should, in order to create an equitable classroom. We are the subject expert. We will always be the subject expert, but we are not an expert in their experiences. We are not an expert in the ways in which they think about applying our subject expertise that we're sharing with them, right? So we are not the only teacher in the classroom, and it's important to keep that in mind. So building a classroom that's grounded in educational equity requires the focus to be on two primary things. I mean, I'm paring it down, but these are the two biggest things to be attentive to: environment and curriculum. So how do we begin to build an inclusive, equitable, and impactful classroom environment? Again, there are lots of ways to go about doing this. I'm going to highlight three pretty primary things to do to create an equitable and inclusive environment, but there are many more. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. So the first is be explicit. Again, what we know is that increasingly the students who come to our classroom are going to be first-generation students. And so it's going to be important that we help students as much as we can develop institutional literacy. Don't assume that all students know how different aspects of university life work. And that's not just, right, where to go for their financial aid or how to get things out of the library, but things like how to read a syllabus, what a syllabus is for, what are student hours, how do you take notes, how do you study for a test, okay? And certainly, right, you're not going to be able to do deep dives into all of these things, but don't assume that all students know how to do this. Many students will not be coming into our classroom knowing what a syllabus is. Many students don't know what office hours are. And in fact, I would encourage you to call them student hours instead of office hours, because office hours are often translated into something else in students' mind, especially first-generation students. Many of them think that office hours means that that's a time where faculty don't want to be bothered because they're working. Explain what student hours are, right? Not just that these are when they are, but what are they for? What can you do during student hours? Be as explicit as possible as you're explaining things. And not only will being explicit help them to begin to develop institutional literacy, but they will also become comfortable with you, right? and know that they can come and ask you questions. Because oftentimes, as we've all been in this situation at one point in our life or another, you don't want to feel stupid asking a question that you think everyone else knows the answer to. And if you create an environment where you're just explicit and you're transparent, then students will feel more comfortable coming to you, asking you, a simple question that can have a large impact, right? If they don't know what a syllabus is for or how to read a syllabus, that's going to have a huge impact on their ability to succeed in your classroom. The next one is mitigate stereotype threat. So for those who aren't familiar, stereotype threat is a term coined by scholars, sociologists, actually, Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson, that refers to a situational predicament in which people are or feel themselves to be at risk of confirming negative stereotypes about an individual's racial, ethnic, gender, or cultural group, which is theorized to be a contributing factor to longstanding racial and gender gaps in academic performance. So Claude Steele did quite a few sort of sociological experiments that really demonstrated that if people have a sense, right, that their faculty member or someone who is in a point of authority already assumes that they are going to fail or they're not equipped. This becomes especially prevalent in STEM fields, that they sort of internalize it and they do worse on exams and on assignments. And not because they aren't capable, but because they have begun to sort of worry about how they are confirming those sorts of social thoughts around gender and race and performance in academic space. So you can mitigate stereotype threat. You're not going to be able to like completely get rid of it, right? You're not going to really be in every space that your student is to try to convince them, nope, you've been here, you've done the work, you're going to be good. But you can mitigate it, right, by providing the tools and again, the spaces to ask questions. So, study guides, how to go through the study guides, how to use the study guides, right? I know a lot of faculty do provide study guides. And again, they just assume that students will know how to use them, that it's intuitive, that they'll know how to use them. How to do time management for exams, just different things that you can contribute to creating a space that will make students feel more comfortable in their capabilities. Because it isn't, again, that students who are women or students who are students of color are less able or capable, but because there have been so many social stereotypes about the capabilities around particular groups, it definitely contributes to performance in classes. And then the third one is build trust. As you teach, be mindful of the difference between scholarly expertise and social authority. Most of your students are going to look to you as being the authority, right? Because you're going to be the person who's assigning a grade. So in that way, you are an authority, but you're not a social authority, right? You're the person who's providing structure to this topic. Okay, you've created a structure for 16 weeks of how you're going to go through and learn this topic and the different assignments that are going to help build that knowledge. And so you have that expertise, but you're not, again, a social authority. So there shouldn't be judgment on when and how, a student is doing particular things in class, right? Again, lead with empathy, and again, building that trust will create that space where students will be comfortable in coming to you if they are struggling. Because oftentimes the faculty member is the last person a student wants to go to say that I'm struggling. And really, that should be the first person you go to when you're struggling with a class. So build trust. And again, right, you can start that really out by introducing the course as a learning community, that while you have the expertise in this particular topic, that you are all there to learn together. Like, really that one little step at the beginning of a class can have a huge impact. So how can we put these environmental foundations into practice? So here is a reflective exercise, again, that will be provided to you afterwards. Assume every student in your class is a person of color, a woman, is a member of the LGBTQA plus community, is working class, is first generation, is neurodiverse, has access issues, has food and or housing insecurity, has caregiver or family provider roles, has to work full-time, is not a native English speaker. How would your pedagogical practices need to change to ensure the most responsive and impactful course and classroom experience for that student? If you assumed all of those things of every single one of your students, if you took into consideration what changes would need to be made to your pedagogical practices to create space that is both inclusive of these students as well as impactful to their learning and development, what would you have to do? Because all of those things that were listed on the previous slide, all of these things have impact on how your students come to class. These are all things that your students bring to class, not every single one of them, right? But if you assume, if you approach all of your students as being every single one of these, right? Having every single one of these identities or experiences, then you can begin to grasp what it would require, right? To be inclusive, to create access for everyone to be a part of the community in an equitable way. Okay, so let's move on to the next, to curriculum, okay? So while a focus on environment is important to ensure that the structure in which we are delivering education is equitable, focus on curriculum is important to ensure that the content that we are introducing is diverse and critical. Again, oftentimes as instructors, we do not, or we don't have the time to sort of step back and think about, especially topics that we've taught forever, right? We don't really think about the diversity of it or being critical about the topic at its core, not in the way that you're teaching critical thinking. So I want to talk about additive diversity versus integrated diversity. So let's start with additive diversity. So additive diversity, elements of diversity added in small or isolated ways meant to improve or increase diverse representation in a particular space, program, class, etc. Okay. Here are 3 examples of additive diversity. 1, adding 1 book or film by a person of color, a woman, a member of the LGBTQ community, scholar or artist to a class that is predominated by books or films by white men, straight scholars or artists. 2, only discussing issues around race, class, gender, etc. during topics that seem explicitly related to those issues of social diversity. And 3, having a singular assignment that has students engage elements of diversity as related to the topic, but isn't necessarily connected to the other assignments of the class. Okay, these are all examples of additive diversity. Versus integrated diversity. So integrated diversity is a deliberative approach to using diversity as a mindset to coordinate and unify equal representation and equitable access throughout all spaces, programs, classrooms, etc. by design. Okay. The by design part is the important part. So you're deliberately creating an approach to the topic that by design is using diversity as the lens. Okay. So examples of integrated diversity are embedding questions throughout class about how the discipline and field of which your classes are a part have created a canon and foundation that largely erases scholars and thinkers who are people of color, women, LGBTQ, and or non-Western peoples, and what the impact of those formulations of expertise is. So you teach students how to ask questions, not just about the content, but also about the social context of what they are learning, okay? Because again, most of our students are coming with a kind of banking sensibility of education, right? They come to class, you fill up their account, and then they leave, right? Most of them, many of them, right? Because that's been their experience with education. So teaching them not only to ask questions about the specific content, but also about the social context in which that content was created, really begins to develop their critical thinking and their ability to ask questions. It also demonstrates to them, right, the ways in which knowledge is produced. Knowledge is not, right, it just doesn't come out of a vacuum. It is actually something that is produced. And especially for those students from minoritized communities, it is important that we share those skills of how to begin to critically question how knowledges are produced. I mean, it's important for all of our students, but certainly for those students who rarely see themselves represented as the scholars that they're reading in class, rarely see themselves actually as the scholars who are in front of the class, right? These are important skills to begin to learn, to know that they can ask those questions. Make the majority of your texts and critical resources for your course be the work of people of color, women, and or non-Western scholars. The fact of the matter is that every discipline has a vast group of works that are written by people of color, women, and non-Western scholars, right? They usually just don't make the foundational or the canonical work that we present. Third, be attentive to normalize social languages that center dominant identities and make efforts to normalize more inclusive language during class discussions. The most, sort of obvious example of this is the use of men to stand in for all people, right? Push yourself to use more inclusive language. So one thing as we think about the difference between additive and integrated diversity is that additive diversity should not be seen as a bad approach to diversity, right? I mean, I've presented this as a versus, but it's really just a versus as this is how one sort of operates and this is how another operates. But additive diversity should not be seen as a bad approach to diversity, but neither should additive diversity be understood as the endpoint of increasing diversity. Additive diversity is always only the beginning of increasing diversity in substantive and impactful ways. So, start there. If that's the easiest place to start there, but don't stop there. And so here is to get you thinking about your classes in these ways. Here's another reflective exercise. So if you take a few minutes to think about a course that you've taught, write down a list of things that you do in your classes that are motivated by the desire to improve and increase diversity. Once you write those things down, separate that list into two categories: things that are additive diversity and things that are integrative diversity. And you'll begin to see, right? You'll begin to see the work that you need to do. If all of the things that you've done are additive, then start thinking about, okay, how can I move that forward? If you're already doing some integrative things, awesome. What else can I do, right? to integrate diversity. If you're not doing either, this is a good exercise too. Then you'll see, right? You'll see what first steps you need to take. So I'll move toward a type of conclusion by giving a few examples of small equity-minded changes that you can begin to include in your practice. So here are 4 examples of some equity-minded classroom practices that you can begin to do. And they're real small. I mean, they're real small, but they will have a big impact. So the first is calling names on rosters. It's possible that many of you are already doing this, and if so, applause. I don't know how many people call names on rosters anymore. I know if you have like 100+ students, you're really not doing that. But if you are in a class that is of a size where you can get to know your students, obviously learning their names and calling their names on rosters is a place where you start. So an equity-minded practice is, as you're going through on the first day, call by last names. Tell your students, I will call by last names, and then please tell me the first name that I should call you during class. What this does is it reduces the anxiety for those students for varied reasons who might go by a different name than the name that is listed on your roster. It doesn't put that, right? If you're like Charles Smith, if you call that name and the student is like, I actually go by Sarah, now all of a sudden everyone is looking at Sarah. But if you say Smith and she says, I like to go by Sarah, awesome, Sarah, great to meet you. Right? Simple thing creates a space of inclusion, does not create a space of exclusion. Evaluative assignments versus building assignments. It's always good if you have the capacity to put both of these in your syllabus, right? Building assignments, tell your students, these are assignments where you can make the mistakes, right? So in this assignment, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and like, just go for it. Do everything you can with it, because this assignment is a building assignment. I want you to develop and identify where you're really strong in this topic right now and where you're really weak. This is not going to be evaluated, but I want you to do it. I want you to like do it with vigor. This is a building assignment. And then what you're going to do with that building assignment is you are going to formulate the assignment that will be evaluated. But do the building assignment with vigor, because I'm going to help you through it, right? I'm going to help you in the places that you suck. I'm going to like applaud you for the things that you're strong at. And we're going to help to create the best assignment that you possibly can give that's going to be evaluated. What are the knowledge have you learned about this topic in class that I didn't ask you? Students, again, will have different approaches to studying. They will focus, like all of us, on different things, right? And so in our head, we're like, well, this is the priority. This is what you should really be focusing on. But meanwhile, they're like, well, I was really interested in this. And so I took a lot of notes on this thing that you never asked me about. So if you have an exam or in your final assignment, give students an opportunity to tell you, what knowledge have you learned about this topic that I didn't ask you in class? Because that will confirm for them that they actually put in the work. Just because that was not your primary focus, that was not your priority, doesn't mean that it's illegitimate knowledge, doesn't mean that they failed, that they were unsuccessful. It just means like, okay, that's awesome. You know, I'm sorry I didn't ask you about that because I would have loved to have that conversation. But it affirms the student, right? It affirms that they're getting it right. Okay. And then do-overs, you know, just either formally, right, have assignments that students can do over, or, you know, if a student really screws an assignment up, again, you can lead with empathy and be like, I would love to talk about like what went wrong here. And, you know, if they take that opportunity, then give them a chance to do it over. right? Just give them a chance to do it over. Because oftentimes there are a lot of things going on that could have impacted why they messed up an assignment so badly. So these are 4 small examples of equity-minded practices that you can integrate. And then 10 things you can start doing right now. Lead with empathy, self-reflect, practice cultural humility, hold yourself accountable, don't assume, avoid deficit-based lens, right? Just because a student screwed up an assignment doesn't mean they're not capable. You have no idea what the context is, so don't assume. Again, create those spaces where you can talk to a student about why an assignment went wrong. Always be learning. Always, always, always be learning. Treat each class as unique. Again, I know that as faculty members, we are all overworked, like beyond. And so it is hard for us to go into a class that we have taught 20 times before and be like, this is a unique class, but it is. Every class is unique. Get feedback from your classroom community. You can do check-ins during the term or at the end, not just the student evaluations. Ask questions that you want to know. Did you like this reading or did you hate it as much as I did? Which assignment did you really like doing? Which assignment did you not like doing? Just what do you want to know? Not the student evaluations. What do you want to know? Make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, then you're not practicing. And if you're not practicing, then nothing's getting done. So make mistakes, but then do better. Don't just make the mistakes and then just keep making those mistakes. Make mistakes, do better, rinse and repeat. So I'm going to leave you with 2 thoughts on educational equity from 2 very renowned scholars of education to keep in mind as you move forward. The first is from Barute Kefele, and he's written so many books, especially focused on K through 12 education and in leadership, principal leadership. Equity is not solely something that you do. Equity is who you are. Equity is a reflection of the educator's humanity towards the students they serve, right? It's not something you do. It's a practice. It's who you are. If you're practicing it, it is who you are. And then I end with Paulo Freire, perhaps the most renowned scholar when it comes to educational equity. What the educator does in teaching is make it possible for the students to become themselves. They bring themselves into your classroom and they are going to develop as themselves, but only if you create the space and opportunity for them to do so. So we do actually have time for questions. And so
We have an amazing set of scholars here who I know have a lot of questions. One of them was just, can they have your PowerPoint?
yes, you can have my PowerPoint, sure.
But there were so many questions that came into my head, Lisa, while you were speaking, and I know I can dominate a room. So I'm going to just give space for 15 to 20 seconds so someone else can speak. And it looks like Carrie is hot on it. So Carrie, go for it.
First, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. It's so much to consider and so much to be inspired by, and I certainly am. So first, thank you so much. As I process this, one thing that would help me, could you expand a little bit on, you had a slide that discussed building trust, and you mentioned that we are the experts on the scholarship on the subject, but we are not social authorities in the classroom. Could you expand on that just a bit, please?
Sure. I think a lot of faculty, well, it's not just faculty who assume the role, but students coming in also, again, because their educational experiences have been up to this point largely defined by things being punitive, right? So you're sort of punished for things that you don't do. And that could be anything, right? It could be behavioral, it could be assignment, it could be like, you know, all of these things. And so if if the student and the teacher just come into the classroom kind of implicitly filling those roles, right, that the student is waiting to either be given praise or be punished, then that creates a really challenging power dynamic, right? Whereas if we just remind ourselves, we're the ones who know this topic, right? If they no one's gonna like outrun me on this topic. Not in the classroom, not in this classroom, probably in a conference where a question is a comment, but not in the classroom, right? So I'm the subject expert, but I am not the social authority. I am not here to praise or punish you for your experiences, because students who come to education that way because that's their experience, again, often have trouble when they articulating struggles, right? So they don't want to admit, like, I swear to you, I cannot understand this concept. I know we've gone over it 30 times. Can you please, and a lot of communities, right? Working class communities, different cultural communities, are often socialized not to ask for help to begin with, right? And so if they are, if you don't articulate or aren't explicit about, like, hey, I'm in learning community with you, I'm the subject expert, but we're all here to learn. So please feel free to ask your questions either while we're together or come to me afterwards. So the more that you can make students feel like, they're not going to be criticized or punished or anything like that. So that's what it means to avoid being a social authority. And again, sadly, that's most students' experiences with education. And so they just assume that that's what their experience is going to be in your classroom. But it's important to make those changes. So.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Todd.
So I'm going to reveal my vulnerability here. Oh no, Hillary is good.
Okay, Hillary's gonna.
No, I mean, because I know Hillary because she's a LIFT fellow and she has really insightful questions. I have one and I can always ask because they know where you live. So here we go. Hillary, go.
I always overtalk too. So I was also, not that you overtalk, but I do overtalk. So, but I'll make this short, which is, I really struggle with larger classes, like 100 on, let's say. And I definitely have the evaluative exercises in the building, but I have 2 building and 1 evaluative, and that's kind of it, because otherwise it gets too hard with grading. But when I read my course evals, the students really appreciate, they have a field notes activity because I teach methods. They love taking field notes. They're so anxious they'll get it wrong. And I'm just try. I'm looking for effort. But I can't give them the chance to redo over and over because there's not enough TAs, there's not enough hours. I guess what I'm trying to say is, as I'm struggling with growing and improving as an instructor, what can I do with these large classes, knowing that's the reality of our institution, but wanting to strive to really do these things?
Yeah, I mean, the larger classes are a different beast altogether, from how you deliver information to how you create assignments. And so again, I would say the first thing is to create as best you can that sense of we're a community of learners. Because in large lectures, especially, students rarely ask questions. Except, is this going to be on the exam? That's usually the question that you will get in the large lectures. So that's actually one space, right? To just be look, I know we're a large group and I know that sometimes it's sort of difficult to ask questions, but I really encourage you to ask questions during our time together. So to create that sort of space. Insofar as assignments, I mean, the one thing that you can do, I mean, because you can't, like you said, you can't have them do over and over and over. It's always, It's been useful to me to give students the option to have an assignment that they throw away, right? So you can, so here are the assignments for the course. And, by the end, after you've turned them all in, the ones that you're feeling real good about. Tell me which one you don't want me to count. And I won't count that one, right? So again, that way you give them agency to determine, like, I really sucked it on this one, whatever, I had to work, I didn't sleep, I didn't whatever, or I just didn't do it. And so it gives them agency. It doesn't put the onus on you to be like, okay, well, you can do it over whatever in this large class. But it also creates this idea, like, look, not every little thing you're going to do is going to be held to a standard. We all have those moments. So I'm going to give you the opportunity, once the final thing is turned in, tell me which assignment you don't want me to count. And everyone has to have an assignment that they don't want you to count, right? So the superstar A+ student, even you, must choose an assignment that I am not going to count. But yeah, so then you give students the agency around it. And again, it sort of creates that space where they're not like, God, everything I do is going to be graded and judged, and I don't have any, so that's one thing I think that you can do in a large class like that.
Lisa, I'm gonna be a bull in the china closet, and I'm gonna embroider on what you say.
Okay.
And I'm affirming everything you say. And Hillary, I'm also going to add on that when we make assessments that are really competency based, then the bar is very clear. So what Lisa was saying was about transparent design. Like, this is what you need to do to get what you want and what you need and what you need to demonstrate. And I recognize that our students are whole people and things, even our A+ students, right? Like Lisa said, have stuff that trips them up. And so I will say to them, you can take your top 2 scores of whatever, however you've parsed your assessments. I will say you can take the top 2 and double them. You can double them. And so what that does is it incentivizes them trying their hardest. When we do drop a score, it's like, I've given up and I'm going to crawl into bed. But we want them to know that they can, and it's going to be awesome. And what the top 2 does is that it shines on their goodness. And even if they had to have a 0 on a day, that's fine, because that double fills that spot. Where this philosophy breaks down is if we're grading on a curve, where we're making students compete against one another. And so if we're taking really competency-based approach, here's what it means to be an A, and everybody can be an A. Everybody, right? Some of our students don't want to be A students. They just want to get the C so they can go on, because they have so much going on in their lives. Let's acknowledge that. I will tell you what, today I am a C professor. Today was really hard because there's a gas outage. My kids are home. I'm cold. I have a elder care issue. Like, I am a C, maybe a C- student today, but that is okay. So I 100% what Lisa is saying, and it does mean dialing into what it means to be a holistic human and then adjusting. So anyway, I know Jenny had a question.
Well, I did have a question. Now I have a comment. Because I think that's all just totally right on. And also I liked, Lisa, your conversation about building. And you're not going to know how to do something right away if it's the first time you've done it. And, often I'll tell students, like, sometimes I make up something that I did, but I'll try to think back to the first time I tried yoga and how terrible I was at yoga. Of course I was terrible. It's called a practice anyway. But letting students see, you built a skill over time. And then, so coupled with dropping your lowest or dropping your lowest 2, usually they see they dropped the first 2 because they built a skill. They didn't know how to do it, and now they do know how to do it. See, that's how it works. And I have a much longer question for you. I know we're up against the hour. I will find you in your office and ask
Okay.
you.
Yes, please come find me in my office for the question. Any of you can, please come find me in my office. I will also say to that comment, Jenny, yeah, I mean, that building trust, that building community, that saying that we're all learners in this community, it is always good to have those moments that you share with students. I always share with students, right? Because in most of my courses, students had to, do citations. Right. I mean, all students do necessarily, but you're in a lit course or you're in an ethnic studies course, you're really going to have to do citations. I'm always frank with my students. I can't do Chicago style citations to save my life. Still can't. I'm 20 plus years in academia, and still to this day, I always screw up. If I have to do Chicago, an editor is always sending stuff back. What style is this? I don't know. It looked like Chicago. I threw that in, So again, and going back, Carrie, to your earlier question, right? Then you're not the social authority, right? You are a person who there's stuff that I don't know. There's stuff that I'm not good at. So I'm not going to sit here, and tell you that you, no, that's terrible MLA. Well, okay, so what? That's not no one will die because you have terrible MLA citation. But get better at it. It's good. So anyway, yes. But Jenny, yeah, come find me. Erica, come find me. Any of you can come find me. I'm usually always here. So it's
And if you heard dialing in from another campus, you can still come find her.
Yeah, you can. I'm usually just here. But I know that we're at time. Thank you all for joining me today. Erica, I don't know if you have any final comments.
Oh, I always feel like I should be eloquent at the end of these events, but all I can really say is, Lisa, this was amazing. You gave some practical tips for us to think about, and your reflection questions I know will be important for anybody who's on their educational journey for equity. So thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great holiday.